know if you ever do this. I do this a lot, okay? I find myself having to put things together. And whenever I have to put things together, there are two things I absolutely hate putting together, okay? The first one is IKEA furniture, okay? All right? You know what I'm talking about. I do not like putting IKEA furniture together because something always goes wrong, you know? Something doesn't go right, something doesn't make sense. The other thing I hate putting together is something we just bought recently. It's a trampoline. I do not like putting together trampolines. This is our second large trampoline because the first trampoline, well, let's just say it blew away. So I do not like putting together large objects or furniture or things like that, and I always do. This is why I don't like it. It's really more me than the object, okay? Because what I do when you open up a box that you get in the mail or in Amazon or whatever you do, you open it, and the very first thing you're looking for is the guide, right? And so I locate the guide, I pick up the guide, I skim the guide, I get annoyed by the guide, I start criticizing how good the guide is put together, and then I just throw this guide over here and say, well, I'm going to make this work, you know? And so what ends up happening is from time to time I'll consult the guide for a step, but then I'll get really excited because I feel like I'm building it well, and then I'll just disregard the guide, and I'll just keep going until, like this thing that just happened when I was building our trampoline, I got so far ahead, and I was doing so great, and I was like, man, record time, this isn't as bad, and then I had to retake it apart because I did it backwards. Wrong side, because those little holes on the page were not very obvious. Obviously, it's the guide's fault, not the person reading the guide. And so I took it all apart and I started putting it back together. I got really confident again. I stopped looking at the guide. I started putting it together. And you know what I did? I skipped a step again. And I had to go back and redo it the way that it said to do it. Otherwise, building that trampoline wasn't going to work. So, full disclosure, I despise putting things together. Okay, which is odd, because if you know me, I actually like building things. I actually like putting things together. I actually like working with my hands some when I create my own plans. Like, I'm good with that. You know, if I engineer it, then I know exactly how it's going to go, and I can figure it out. I don't need a guide. If I can just come up with my own steps, it will all be good. And so it's when there is a guide that I start to run into problems. And oftentimes, I despise the guide. I despise it. I don't want to do what it says. It doesn't make sense. Even though the guide, if I just were to pay attention to it, if I were just to lean into it, if I were just to try to decipher it, even if it's super confusing or little tiny print or the holes aren't as obvious so I know which side to put things up, it would save me time. It would save me headache. It would probably make it safer for my kids to be on. And looking back, the trampoline wouldn't have blown away. So, you kind of got to do all of the steps from the past. And so it's when I despise the guide, it's when I don't want to do what the engineering says, this is the best way to do this. This is the best how-to. That's when I get in trouble. And then, of course, all of you have one of these, okay? This is mine. This is my extra stuff can, okay? You know what I'm talking about? The stuff that you're like, I don't know what that was supposed to do, but it's sitting on 4 legs and no one's fallen off yet. So then you just start putting stuff in here, and let's just take a look here. What do I have? Well, I've done a few things. This isn't really something I didn't do. These are just hinges that I need to change because they don't match, and so I just haven't done those yet. So we'll just leave those in there. Sometimes it's just stuff we don't get to. Like, we know we need to do it, but we don't get to it. Right here is looks like something for blinds, like a piece that I thought, well, 2 of them will work. I don't want to put the third one on. Okay, I'll throw that one over there. In this bag, this is my son's bed. There's about 10 pieces that are not in the bed. He has not fallen yet, so that'll work. And then these are stakes, okay? These need to be attached to our swing set that I just built. And I just decided I didn't want to do that part yet, at the end of the guide. So these also go to that, and What happens when we do projects, when we're building things, whatever it is, a lot of times, if we don't follow the guide, we're left with pieces that we either chose not to put on or just couldn't figure it out and said it works, right? It works. And, we have two options. We could figure out how it works, or we could just buy a bigger can. Then we could just do it that way. And it's kind of funny because, it's okay to despise the guide when you're building IKEA furniture or whatever it is that you're working on from time to time, but it is not okay when you're building relationships to despise the guide. It's not okay to have a can of, I didn't get to that yet, or I couldn't figure out where to place that, how to place that, and so we just place it here. And, hey, maybe one day, when there's a problem with the thing I built, I'll go find that piece and I'll actually go put it on, and then we'll be good to go. That's an okay approach to building furniture and things like that, but it's not okay when you're building relationships. It's not okay to despise the guide. So let me just ask a question. How are you building right now? How are you building your marriage? How are you building your friendships? How are you building that relationship with your parents? And there's some rough edges there, and there's some disagreements there, but you want a relationship with your parents, and so there's some building things that have to happen there. How are you building that relationship with your kids? I know they're not all the way mature yet, but what are you doing to work on that relationship and not just correct behaviors all the day long? And what are you doing to build those relationships with your siblings? The people that maybe you live with, or maybe the people that you've gotten distant from. What are you doing to build your relationships with your coworkers or your classmates, the people that sometimes you see more than your own family, and maybe the biggest source of your frustration when you come home and then you take it out on your family? All of us are building relationships, and here's the thing. You are using some kind of guide. You are. You may not know it. It may not be the right guide. You might not even be paying attention to the guide at all. You're just kind of doing it. You're just kind of putting it together. You're skipping some steps, and you might have one of these as it relates to your relationships. Do you ever feel this when you build? Proverbs chapter 14, verse 1. Here's what it says. The wise woman builds her house, but with her own hands, the foolish one tears hers down. Do you ever feel like this? Where there's seasons of your life or weeks of your life or months of your life where you're just building so well those relationships. Like you're addressing the problems as you need to. You're not losing your temper. You're not getting bitter. You're not holding things against. And things just seem to be going well. There's momentum at home. There's momentum at work. There's momentum with the people that you care about most. And then the very same hands that built those relationships begin to tear down those relationships. And all it takes is one decision, one skipped step. All it takes is one text message that you should have thought through. All it takes is one conversation that goes south. All it takes is skipping what you know you should do if you were following the right guide. And what happens oftentimes is we build, and things are going well, and then we tear down. And we're left to rebuild. And we're left to get to work at repairing. And oftentimes, when we look back, we knew we shouldn't have done that. We knew we shouldn't have said that. But she just pushed me too far, Or they did that again, and there's just something that happens in me when I see them do that. And it causes me to get away from the guide that would lead me to wise behavior, and I start doing what I don't want to do. And so we're in this new series starting today. We're going to be in it for the next 6 weeks. And we're going to be covering several aspects and themes in the book of Proverbs. What is Proverbs? Proverbs is written by Solomon, who gets the tagline, the wisest person that ever lived. Which if you really look into his life, you realize that he learned his wisdom. He was not born with it. He learned it over time. And as he got later in his life, he thought to himself, if I just had a guide, maybe I wouldn't have screwed all this stuff up. Or then he started thinking about his kids. If they just had a guide, maybe they wouldn't make the same mistakes I did. And so you know what Solomon does? He writes one. He writes one. And over in the book of Proverbs, he points to two major problems that all of us face when we're building relationships. Here's the first one, Proverbs 26:11. As a dog returns to its vomit, so fools repeat their folly. Nice word picture there. We all understand that. We don't get why dogs do that, but hey, it's what they do. And here's the problem that Solomon is alluding to. We don't just make mistakes in life or in relationships. This is the problem. We repeat mistakes. We repeat mistakes. We constantly take the same bad approach in our relationships. We continuously use the same bad tone. It didn't work before, but we go back to it. We constantly use the same conflict resolution strategy, and there's still conflict. We keep going back to the same things. We keep saying the same foolish words. We keep allowing the same things to trigger us, and we tear it all down again. And why do we repeatedly do this? I think it's because we despise the guide. We despise the guide. We get in a hurry. We don't take time to take care. We skip steps. We disregard any kind of wisdom or guide for this relationship. We don't think about our next moves. We just get busy because we're so busy anyway, and we misbuild our relationships. We could be wise, but sometimes, this is true, we despise the process of being wise. And so we repeat the mistakes. And then we get stuck in this cycle of never putting all the pieces together and just throwing them in a can for later. And if you do that with your relationships, eventually it gets so full that there's consequences. Eventually, the wind blows and the trampoline blows away because you didn't stake it down. Eventually, a piece of the bed cracks because you didn't put it on right. And we can't do that with our relationships. So what do we do when we want to build relationships, but we repeat the same foolish mistakes and we get stuck in this cycle of the same mistakes and the same problems? We build up and we tear down. We build up and we tear down. What do? You need a guide. All of us who are building anything need a guide. And do you know what our guide is? Our guide is wisdom. We need something to look at when we're building relationships because they're so important. They're so critical. They affect you so much. We need to build with wisdom because we want what we're building to stay built. If you build wisely, if you build with a guide, what you're building may work really, really well, and it may stay built. Our guide is wisdom. But be careful for the second problem with relationships. Proverbs 14:12 warns us of this. There is a way that appears to be right, but in the end, it leads to death. There's a way of handling that. There's kind of a misleading guide that looks like if I do this, if I plug XYZ in, it sounds so good. If I just do this, if I take this approach in this relationship with my wife, with my friend, with my classmates, with my teacher, with my coach, then this will work out well for me. But be careful. Be careful, Solomon says. Because sometimes we understand that we need a guide. Some of you know that. Yes, I need a guide. But all too often, we follow the wrong guides. We follow the wrong guides. We follow things that look like wisdom. We follow things that we see in other people's marriages that look like it's working, but we have no idea what's actually going on. And then we try to assimilate those into our marriage without understanding what's actually happening in their marriage. And so we're using their marriage as a guide, but we don't know what's going on in their marriage. Sometimes we look, at situations or different things and wrong type guides, and we just apply it because it seems like that would be the best way. It seems like that's what other people are doing. That's what Google told me to do. So I'm going to do it. And I'm going to see what happens. There are about 4, there's probably more wrong guides, but these are the ones that I consistently see that lead me astray. The first one is desires. Sometimes what you want has led you into a world of trouble. Sometimes your desires can lead you and guide you to a good thing, and sometimes they can lead you and guide you to do a bad thing. And so they can't be trusted all the time. They potentially could be a wrong guide. Another wrong guide that I see all the time is feelings. So this is different than wants. This is, I feel angry, so I'm going to give them a piece of my mind. This is, I feel sad, so I'm going to draw away from community and from people and from this relationship because I'm hurt. Sometimes feelings lead us to make decisions that if we were to look back, we would go, I really wish I wouldn't have followed that guide. I really wish I would not have followed my heart in that situation because my heart led me to tear down what I did not want to tear down. Another thing we look at that sometimes can be a wrong guide is experiences. Sometimes all it takes is for us to look back at our past and go, I remember that situation from before, and I remember how I handled it, and it worked. So I'm going to do that again. That may be wise, but it may also not be wise. The flip side of that, you may look back and go, that went very badly, that went very poorly, that conversation I tried to have, they weren't open, and it made it worse. And so you go, I'm not even talking to them about this topic anymore. And that may not be wise. So sometimes our experiences, they can guide us. They can help us kind of see the way, but sometimes they can misguide us. And then finally, and we all know this, people. Other people can guide us to do things just by watching them, just by reading their tweets. I mean, just by a friend can advise you and say, I think you should do this. I think you should quit your job. I think you should really tell your wife how you feel. And it may be wise. It may not be wise. And the problem with these guides is they're not the primary guides because they're right sometimes and they're wrong sometimes. And so we know they can guide us. They could work for a week. They could work for a month. They could work for this situation. But applied across the board as a foundation, these are not good guides because they're not consistent. And if those are all that guide your decisions, if that's all that guides your approach to relationships, if that's all that guides your approach to building anything, you might have some success and you might not. And if that's all that's guiding you, if that's all that primarily guides you, this may be why there's some brokenness in some relationships in your life because you followed the wrong guide. This may be why you're repeating the same mistake over and over because your desires are guiding you. People are guiding you. And you're repeating the same foolish thing over and over. Proverbs 3:7 says, do not be wise in your own eyes. What is he saying? He's saying, don't be your own guide. Don't just base your decisions off of the potentially wrong guides. If we decide to make this our guide, ourselves our guide, it's called relativism. What is relativism? Well, relativism, put simply, is when you make decisions, here's how you make decisions. If it works for me, and it doesn't hurt anybody else, then it's wise, then it's right, then it's okay for me to do. And unfortunately, this is the predominant lens for how people, most likely you, most likely me at times, it's my default, how we do morals and how we do wisdom. And this has been the prevailing way of doing things since the 19th century. Do what seems wise in your own eyes. That's the guide you should follow. Does it seem good to you? Does it feel good to you? Is it what you really want? Go do that. As long as it doesn't hurt anybody, as long as, any of that stuff, then you're good. That's relativism. And it's so appealing, isn't it? I mean, part of you kind of wants to nod your head. Absolutely, that's what I want to do. That's how I treat what I want for lunch. Why can't I treat, my relationships that way? Because your own eyes are not trustworthy. How do I know this? Because you've authored your own worst decisions. You followed that advice. You employed that approach. You made that decision that seemed wise in your eyes. It seemed like it would feel good. It seemed like it was the good thing, but it led to that regret. And so your own eyes can't be your guide because they have led you down wrong paths. They have led you to hurt. They have led you to broken relationships. But what if I told you? What if I told you that there is a better guide? And if applied, you and I, we can become wise. We can stop repeated mistakes. This second marriage that we're in, it can actually be better. That if we apply this guide, you won't ruin this friendship like the last one. That if you apply this guide, it will not hijack your semester. You will be able to be wise in your relationships. There's so much hope for all of us who, when we look at this and we go, I don't know if I'm building wisely. Listen to Proverbs 9, verse 1 through 6. Wisdom has built her house, has set up its 7 pillars. She has prepared her meat and mixed her wine. She has also set her table. She has sent out her servants, and she calls from the highest point of the city, let all who are simple come to my house. To those who have no sense, she says, come and eat my food and drink the wine I have mixed. Leave your simple ways, and you will live. Walk in the way of insight. Wisdom is shouting to all of us, you can become wise. You can do it right the next time. You don't have to repeat those mistakes. You can learn, you can get better at all of your relationships. Just come in and have dinner with me. Come in and learn a few things. Come in and embrace your guide. Wisdom is your guide, and you can find wisdom. You can leave your past behind. You can build your relationships well only if you embrace wisdom as your guide. And not just any wisdom, the wisdom of God. Your engineer, the one who made you, the one who created relationships, the one who created family, the one who created working relationships and friendships, he has a guide. And if applied, you can leave your past behind. You can build your relationships so well and so wisely that you can thrive in all of those areas. But you have to embrace the wisdom that comes from God. And the main word for wisdom in the book of Proverbs is yakma. Everybody say yakma. I don't know how to say it either, so we just tried. But what it means is divine wisdom. So there's wisdom that comes from outside of us. There's a law of wisdom. Just like there's physical laws in the universe, there's a law of morals, and then there is a law of wisdom. And God created it for us so that we could apply them to our relationships and so that we could avoid destruction in our decisions, in our most important relationships. Tim and Kathy Keller say this: wisdom includes being moral, but it goes beyond that. It is making the right choice even when there are no clear moral laws. So we're not asking the question, is it wrong to lie? Of course it is. We're asking the question then, how do I avoid from lying, right? It's a little bit deeper. It does you no good to know if something's wrong if you're just going to do what seems right in your own eyes. So Proverbs is a book of how-tos. There are universal principles for how to build relationships. The good news is we have a guide to be wise, and it's the Proverbs. And Daniel Bricker says this: the instructions in the book of Proverbs are intended to enable a person to be skillful in family relationships, community, and their relationship with God. Here's how the book of Proverbs opens. The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, for gaining wisdom and instruction, for understanding words of insight, for receiving instruction in prudent behavior, doing what is right and just and fair, for giving prudence to those who are simple, knowledge and discretion to the young. Let the wise listen and add to their learning, and let the discerning get guidance. Think about it. You can acquire wisdom. You don't have to tear down those relationships. You can actually build better. So where do we start? Well, this is a very important step one. So if you were to open a guide that you're about to build something, there's a step one. I suggest looking at that. So here's step one, Proverbs 1:7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. But fools despise wisdom and instruction. The word despise just really jumps out to me, because sometimes when we look at wisdom or the wise thing, our honest reaction is, I don't like that. That doesn't jive with my feelings and how I want to treat them. I really want to speak my mind here, but wisdom wouldn't be doing that. And so sometimes we despise it because it's hard. It's hard to be surrendered to a wise guide. Sometimes we just don't want to. We don't want to follow wisdom. And sometimes it's hard to follow it because here's the truth, we all have to grow in it. You're not born wise. I'm not born wise. We learn wisdom. We apply it over time. And this is so important. Don't despise the guide. God has given you a guide. And so many times you and I look at it, and then we look at another way of handling it, and we go, I don't know if I want to do that. I'm going to do this. And you're risking your most important relationships when you disregard and sometimes despise the guide. And so here's what you need to do. You need to decide that you need a guide. Decide that you need a guide. Luke Skywalker needed Yoda. Aladdin needed the genie. Batman needed Alfred. And you need a Morgan Freeman in every movie he's ever played. You need a guide because you want good relationships. You want good relationships, and there are at least 3 guides that God provides. The first one is the most important. It's Christ. Think about it. Maybe the entire purpose of Jesus and everything he's done is to show us how to live. Like literally came to earth, literally handled people. When we read the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we see a guide for doing relationships. We see a way of thinking. We see an attitude. We see an approach. And Jesus, at the end of his most famous teaching, Matthew 5-7, at the end of it, here's what he says. And he's actually making a plea that he is wisdom. He's actually tweaking some words in Proverbs. And here's what he says, Matthew 7:24-27. Therefore, anyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on a rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against the house, yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell with a great crash. Are you building your relationships on Christ. I'm not asking you to make a decision about who Christ is, the Son of God, the one who went to the cross for our sins. I didn't ask you to decide that. I'm asking you to build on that. I'm asking you to put his words into practice so that you can reap the benefits of not just being Christ-centered in your beliefs, but being Christ-guided in your actions, in your marriage, and your friendships, and the relationship you have with your parents, and your dating relationships. Let them be Christ-guided. Let him lead you. Jesus is the ultimate guide. He even says it, I am the way. I am the truth. I am the life. Looking for life? Follow me. He's who you turn to when you don't know what to do or how to handle a situation. You turn to the words of Jesus and you do what Jesus says. Looking for a guide? Jesus is your guide. His ways are pure wisdom. And he came so you could observe how he lived and apply it to your life. And so here's a little challenge over the next 6 weeks. Kind of a 1A and a 1B. 1A is for those of you that would get intimidated by this challenge. 1A is I want you to read Matthew 5 through 7 on your own time over 6 weeks. That's 3 chapters. And all of the teaching that Jesus puts in there, apply it to your relationships and be wise. The 1B for you scholars out there is to read the entire book of Proverbs as well and begin to think through this construct. What is the wise thing to do in this relationship, in my marriage, as a parent, however that applies to you? Build and guide your life and your relationships on Christ. The second guide that God provides and that we need to embrace, and it's really more of a posture. It really is. Correction. And everybody loves correction, don't they? We just love it so much. Hey, you made that mistake. Be quiet. You know? What I'm telling you right now, don't treat correction, whether it's from your parents, from your spouse, from a grandparent, from a friend. I don't care what source it comes from, the Bible. If it's true, if it's wise, running through the filter of Jesus, open to it. You need to be open to it. When someone corrects you, I want you to have this attitude. Lean in. Have a posture of learning and humility. Don't despise correction. Make it your friend. Test the correction. Invite it in. Be quiet under it. Over and over, you can read through the book of Proverbs, probably every single chapter. It's pointed out that the people who are fools are people who reject correction. Correction is your guide. Test it. Whatever source it comes from, is there some truth to that? They may have been wrong in how they said it. They may not have been tactful or wise, but you are wise. And so you're looking for the truth and the wisdom you can apply from any and every conversation. And by the way, those around you, those closest to you, they may be onto something. You may actually need help with that. You may actually have a problem. You may actually need to see a counselor. They're not annoying you. They love you. And the people around us are a source of wisdom for us. But we have to be open to correction. We have to be ready for it. And the final guide that God gives us to become wise is one we're going to lean in for just a few minutes. It's community. It's community. You could hear Jesus' word every day. You could know it front and back. You could even, theoretically, I guess, be open to correction. And you could still come up short. You could still repeat the same folly over and over and over without getting this last one right. And here's the thing, your mom taught you this when you were a kid. We've known this since we were kids. And Solomon brings it up here. Proverbs 13:20 and 14:7 say this, walk with the wise and become wise. For a companion of fools suffers harm. Stay away from a fool, for you will not find knowledge on their lips. You become like those you associate with. You become like what you're consuming through these ears and these eyes. It influences you. It influences you. It influences me. And so we learn that God created us for community and wants us to be in a consistent community to help us become wise. There's actually a virtue in Jewish culture called debuk havrim, which means literally in English, to be glued to a friend. You are guided by who and what you are glued to. It informs you. It influences you. So who are your friends? Who are you spending most of your time with? Intentionally, unintentionally. Who are you walking with? Are they wise? Is it helping you to build wise? Is that dating relationship wise? Is that thing you're consuming, is it wise? What is influencing? What are you walking with? Because it will influence and it will guide you. It doesn't matter if you're a 74-year-old grandparent, a 45-year-old dad of 3, or a 15-year-old sophomore. You will be influenced by who you walk with and by what you're around and glued to. All of us need a Christ-centered community to walk with if we want to become wise. Tim Keller puts it like this: character cannot be produced only in a classroom, what we're doing right now, but the result of a community. That's so wise. That is so wise. Jesus got up early to encounter God, and so should you. But Jesus also had a routine of community. Who are you intentionally gluing yourself to so you can become wise? Today we are opening up sign-ups for something we call life groups. And life groups is our attempt as a church to help get you connected into community, into real community, so you can develop character, so you can connect relationally, so you can grow spiritually. And you can only usually do this 95% of the time intentionally. Do you have any intentional areas of community with other believers that you're employing in your life? A life group is an intentional place where you can connect relationally and grow spiritually, and here's my favorite word, consistently. Consistently. And so we are launching life groups here in a couple of weeks. We have 3 types of life groups. We're going to have men's life groups, women's life groups, and couples life groups. And I would encourage you to get involved in one of those. We're going to have a launch night for all of those groups here at the church here in a few weeks. And if you're even skeptical about it, let me just point to it. What is guiding you? Would you maybe just consider trying it? I've been in a life group for my entire marriage, and I don't know what I would do in my relationship with God if I didn't have an opportunity to hear feedback from others, to hear the love and the support of others as I try to do this life. So many of us are trying to do this alone. And we need to step into a group. So I want you to consider doing that for this fall. And I just want to take a minute to talk to our families in the room. Parents, high school students, middle school students, elementary kids. The semester is starting tomorrow or Tuesday for some of you, maybe sometime this week. And things are going to get busy real fast. And this is going to be a wise thing for you right now. Don't move too fast that you forget to plug into community. So if you're a parent, your commitment to being in a life group, let me tell you something, it will impact your kids and their journey. When they walk in and they see you with 10 other people praying fervently to the Lord for wisdom, do you know what that does? It does a lot. So get in a group. And if you're a high school student or a middle school student, 10:30, middle school, big group and small group. Parents, get them here every week. They need to be with people that will help them walk through this journey. High school, tonight at 6 o'clock. Small groups, big group, community. Make it a purpose to be there every single week because all of us are building relationships. How will you build them? How will you build them? I just gave you a guide. Proverbs gives us a guide. Christ, correction, community. Don't despise the guide. What do you need to do? Embrace the guide. Will you decide you need a guide? Will you decide you need a guide? The next 5 weeks in this series, we are going to look at 5 different kinds of false guides that we fall for as we try to build relationships. So I hope you're back here for that. Let me just take a moment to pray for you. God, I just want to thank you this morning that you have given us a guide, most clearly seen in Jesus, most clearly seen in his words, his actions, his practices. And God, we want to be the kind of people that adopt that into our life. We want to build relationships. We want to build better marriages. We want to build stronger friendships. And God, we just pray that over the next 5 or 6 weeks, as we get into the semester for some of us, as we get into a group, as we show up to our age group, we want to build wise. We want to build so wise. And so, God, would you just be our foundation in this? Help us to recognize your voice as we build. And show us now what we need to surrender, what we need to give up, so we can embrace the God. We don't want to despise it. We want to bring it in, we want to lean in, and we want to make it our lifestyle. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Hey, would you stand and let's sing?